So with Chapter 4, we're going to look at assessment for diagnosis and eligibility. This is a much shorter chapter, but it's still really important. We're going to really look at the unique diagnostic and eligibility processes, pay attention to the vocabulary, and you're going to look at these learning objectives that by the end of this chapter you should know. First, you should be able to summarize the IDEA guidelines for how we conduct an evaluation. Second, you want to be able to discuss the difference between intelligence and achievement. And then third, you want to be able to define the 5 elements of language and differentiate between them. This is going to be really important for you to have those down really solidly. We'll talk a little bit about diagnosis versus eligibility, how those are different, and the role of the multidisciplinary team. We're also going to look specifically at some terms, intelligence. We're going to look at language specifically, and then we're going to break down the different components of language. We're also going to look briefly at social and emotional characteristics of children, and then also some health and medical status information. So we're going to start first with some key terms. These are interchangeable terms that are used to refer to the diagnostic and eligibility process. Now, different states use different terms, but the terms are comprehensive evaluation, comprehensive diagnostic evaluation, psychoeducational evaluation, and multidisciplinary evaluation. Referring to diagnosis and eligibility, we use the term diagnosis when we are determining whether or not a student demonstrates the required diagnostic criteria associated with a particular disability. When we talk about eligibility, we are determining whether or not the individual qualifies for special education services and then subsequently needs specially designed instruction as the result of their diagnosed disability. Now, depending on the disability, the diagnostic process can take place in different places: educational or private or medical settings. Learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, speech language impairments, all of those can be diagnosed in an educational setting by a school psychologist and other school specialists. But things like ADHD, hearing impairments, visual impairments, health and medical conditions or physical conditions are usually diagnosed in a private or a medical setting by mental health professionals, specialists, or medical professionals. Now then we have the role of the multidisciplinary team, and the role of that team differs depending on whether they are diagnosing the disability and determining eligibility for special ed services, or whether the diagnosis has already been made and they're just determining whether or not the student is eligible for special education services. Now, there are really specific guidelines for evaluation, and this comes from the IDEA regulations. The guidelines for the evaluation are in section 300.304 of IDEA, and the purpose of that is to ensure that students are being evaluated in a way that will allow for reliable, valid results. And it has to be comprehensive to give us a true picture of the student's strengths and needs. When we're talking about intelligence, we're discussing it in relation to someone's level of mental capacity or their potential for learning. We use words like intelligence quotient or IQ, mental ability, mental capacity, or even cognitive ability to all mean the same thing. Intelligence is thought to be innate to individuals, but it's also thought to remain relatively stable over time. Now, if you go to your text on page 96, you'll see some of the different components of these different theories, particularly the last one, the CHC theory, which discusses reasoning and knowledge and short-term memory and other things like that. There are differences between theories of intelligence, and there are many ways to measure intelligence. What we do know is that it's important to have an understanding that an individual's intellectual functioning can be used in combination with other information to give a more complete understanding of an individual's capabilities. So let's look at language. The American Speech Language Hearing Association, or ASHA, defines it as the comprehension and or use of spoken, written, and or other communication symbol systems. What we have to pay attention to is the intersection of language with other areas, like intelligence, social characteristics, and academic achievement. We break language into two big categories, receptive language and expressive language. All right, the role of receptive and expressive language are as follows: oral language, reading, written language, mathematics, and nonverbal abilities. Bloom and Leahy identified three major component categories of language. These are language form, language content, and language use. And then these are further categorized into the different elements of language. We're going to look at 5 main elements of language, and these are phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Starting with phonology. Phonology is the study of sound structure and sound patterns within a language. When we're looking at reading, it involves the ability to connect the visual letters to the sounds that they make. Then we have phonemes. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound within a language. They relate to numbers of sounds in a word, not the number of letters. Then we've got morphology. Morphology is the study of the form or structure of words within a language and how words are formed. A morpheme is each individual unit of meaning. Morphemes can be individual words. And then we have syntax. Syntax is the study of the grammatical structure and rules used for combining words, phrases, and clauses into sentences. Next is semantics, and this is the study of meaning within the language. When we're trying to understand vocabulary proficiency, we can measure vocabulary on dimensions of breadth, depth, and flexibility. Breadth is the number of words someone knows. Depth relates to the knowledge of the meaning and use of those words, and flexibility is related to their ability to choose or adapt the meaning of a word to suit different contexts. And then we have pragmatics. Now, this is the study of how we use language for social interaction. It goes beyond the actual structure of the language. It relates more specifically to how language is used and understood within society. We have language differences. So this is when someone's primary language is different than that of the dominant culture in a school. And then you have to remember that a disability can't be diagnosed based on a language difference. But someone can also have a language delay, and this is when a child doesn't acquire language as quickly as would be considered developmentally typical. Sometimes the rate of learning is just delayed or slow, but it could be a sign of an underlying disability. And then we have language disorders. This is when someone has an actual disorder or a disability relating to their language. There are some social and emotional characteristics that we want to look at. These are the patterns of social skills and emotional functioning that an individual exhibits. These are critical to everyday functioning, and they're often overlooked in favor of other factors. We may be overlooking social and emotional characteristics in favor of academics because those are typically more of a focus in the curriculum, and we also focus more attention on measuring intelligence or language or academics. But these are really necessary because several disabilities include socio-emotional functioning as part of their diagnostic criteria. When we look at social skills and their development, social skills speak to the way an individual relates to others. When it comes to the development of social skills, they're generally the result of a learned behavior and they come from one's personality traits. These are highly relevant in terms of diagnostic criteria for several disabilities, and they can be considered secondary effects of other disabilities. And finally, we have to remember that we need to evaluate and also have information about a student's health and medical status. This is a really important component of the comprehensive diagnostic evaluation. We're going to look at student vision and hearing to see if there's any sensory deficits that could be impacting the student's performance, and also motor capabilities as well. Remember that medical professionals evaluate and diagnose any health or medical conditions, but parents and the school nurse can assist in interpretation and communication of the medical information while we're in the process of determining special education services. When we are considering health and medical conditions, we have to consider a couple of things. First, the type of condition. Is it a chronic condition that persists over time, or is it an acute condition that has a sudden onset and is usually severe? We also need to consider the acquisition of the condition. Is it congenital? Does that mean that the onset is before, during, or just after birth? This could be due to biological or genetic factors, maternal behavior during pregnancy, or a maternal illness during pregnancy. It also could be acquired. The condition could be acquired. This would be an onset at any time during a person's life, and this could be caused by illness or disease or even environmental factors like trauma or poor health habits. Just to summarize, we have multiple characteristics that combine to make an individual unique, and a comprehensive evaluation has to be completed in such a way that the multidisciplinary team can analyze the results and get a truly clear picture of the student's strengths and needs.